Good morning. Good morning. We welcome you to this, our second session of the Civil Rights Symposium, sponsored by Albany State University. We're delighted that you're here this morning. We have a very fine program lined up for you. Three stalwarts in the civil rights movement, the Reverend Sherrod, his wife, Mrs. Shirley Sherrod, and the Reverend Brother Boyd, who's a minister at Shallow Baptist Church. They were right in the middle of the Albany movement. They have served well and are continuing to serve. You may read their bios. When I met Reverend Sherrod in person, I told him I had met him through Eyes on the Prize. That's a film I show my students usually each year. And we know his wife, Mrs. Shirley, through the controversy, and she has come out strong. So we're delighted to have you, and we invite you to present as you see fit. Thank you so much for coming.
A lot of years have passed. A lot of water. A lot of tears. But a lot of joy as well. I'm going to try to remember I wrote a few notes down. I don't know how this is going to work out. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee began in the 60s when thousands of college students sat down at lunch at segregated lunch counters and stirred up local communities to do so as well. So when the college students sat in, high school students and middle school students sat in and joined, and the adults joined the lines into jail. But the first people we spoke to get their support were the leaders. And that's how I was invited to come to Albany. I had two names. C.W. King and Dr. Ham. We got to know Dr. Boyd, Reverend Boyd, later on. He became the backbone of the movement. The adults and leaders were already grown up with all the fears of police, fear of downtown, just common fears of the courthouse. His boss was still boss, but not so for the youth. The youth had not grown up under the brutality and unjust laws, unjust judges, no yaza, nausea, no scratching where they weren't itching. Young people were strong and just needed a little nudging and direction. On the other hand, we found Albany to be an armed camp. There was a rifle in every house. Upon entering the house, you would find a weapon on the mantelpiece. in the corner, in the closet, up to 4 on the truck rack. And these were poor people armed to the hilt. So we had to find a way to change this spirit of war to a spirit of love. We had to find a way to deal with the violent spirit. Before each march, we had to search the whole group. And we searched and never ceased to find weapons. I doubt there was one search that we didn't find at least one weapon. A little old lady, about 70 years old, she's passed now. She showed me her, I think it was a 25 millimeter in her pocketbook. She said, I keep that in my pocketbook. And you hear her pray in the church. She could pray like the mountains would be moved. But she kept that revolver in her pocketbook. There was some fear, even among the young people. But the strength of our movement was the music in our movement. The music gave us the backbone. I think I'll stop there. We'll have questions afterward, and I can go on and on.
You know, every time I hear the historians read a book and hear the historians' take on the Albany movement, they say it was a failure. It burns me up every time. The fact is, and I usually say to people, I can remember I was out in Chicago and I was getting an award, and the man from California was there also getting an award. And he showed me his route. He takes children on a tour every summer. And I looked at it, and Albany wasn't on the route. So I asked why, and I knew why. But I asked him why, and he said, he started beating around the bush. I said, you can go on and say it. You think Albany was a failure, right? He said, yes, it was. And I said to him, was Dr. King the movement? And he had to say, no. I said, well, Dr. King wasn't the movement. The movement was going on in Albany when he came here, and it continued after he left, and it has continued nonstop all of these years up to today. My husband is the only field secretary, the only person in SNCC who left to go into a community and stayed all of these years. So the work has continued, and so we still have to fight that. And then if you look at Selma, when they talk about Albany, they actually refer to the failure, and they're talking about Dr. King's failure. It wasn't our failure. They make Pritchett appear to be so smart that he was able to really keep us from getting many gains here in Albany. And there was no violence, they say. Dr. King would I think they try to make the point that he would try to pick an area where you'd have those Bull Connor type people who would do things out in the open. So Dennis Roberts, who was a student during the summer of 1963, Dennis was a law student who came to work with C.B. King. After all of these years, last year, Dennis found his diary that he kept while he was here in Albany, and he sent the diary to me. He said, you can use it in any way you want to. I actually shared it with Frank here at the museum, and I tried to encourage Dennis to say, Dennis, you really need to look at how you can publish this. But what I'd like to do is read a few excerpts from that diary. This Saturday, July the 22nd, 1963. 2 local agents of the FBI came in today to see Attorney King regarding allegations that violence was directed toward Joanne Christian and Bert Stack, who are in jail. Today, I was introduced to Chief Laura Pritchett, and he readily admitted me to the cell area. The cells are unbelievably filthy. Smells of human excretion overwhelm you on entering. Puddles of water covered the floor, and the Negro girls complained of having water sprayed on them by the police. 14 Negro males were stuffed into a 4-man cell and will remain there at least a week until they come to trial. Of course, sleeping is impossible. In another bunk, no mattresses, are 7 white girls, all SNCC workers. Sunday, June 23rd. We drive to Camilla in Mitchell County where the juveniles are being kept. We spoke with Joanne Christian, who was beaten, kicked, and dropped through the arrest while in jail. She is one of the most amazing people I have met, only 15 years old, yet completely fearless. Tuesday, June 25th. Last night, 13 people of the group that walked down to City Hall after the mass meeting were arrested and charged with parading without a permit. 7 of them were juveniles. Patty Gaines, a 13-year-old girl, was dragged up the steps of the police station by her heels so that her head hit every step. During the day, Bert Danziger of the Civil Rights Commission came into the office. He is in Albany to investigate charges of police brutality and the concerted effort to get SNCC. Hilbrun of the Justice Department is also here. I spoke with Danziger for about 4 hours, giving him details of the arrest of the past week. It seems that this was a complete waste of time, as the Commission and Justice Department simply investigates and files reports, but nothing ever gets done. Meanwhile, the brutality continues. Though all other juveniles have been released on the order of the juvenile court judge, they are still holding Joanne. One of the things you'll see is that the local press, the FBI, the state, and all, it wasn't just Pritchett, it was all of them keeping the word of the police brutality here in this area from getting out to the public. Sunday, June 30th. I'll never be able to adequately communicate the tension of sitting around the SNCC office knowing that any minute a shot can come through the window, or walking 2 blocks home and tightening up every time a car approaches, as it could be the cops and a vagrancy arrest. If people on the outside want to know what can be done to help the situation here, the only thing besides money which is desperately needed to appeal these cases is to write and wire the Justice Department, Kennedy, etc., demanding to know what they intend to do about the police brutality and the deprivation of constitutional rights here in Albany. This seems to help, as Hilbrun of the Justice Department covered the trials because of the kids, and he's talking about the white kids. Parents pressured their congressman. Of course, his presence didn't make a damn bit of difference. July the 1st, I got Penny out at about 11 a.m. She was very weak, having fasted for 11 days and could hardly walk. The desk sergeant tried to keep her. I had to show him the papers the judge signed for her release. Attorney King talks about the same kind of irrelevancies all the time down here. They just keep you running from building to building. The paperwork is never right, all of which is simplified for the white attorneys. When I got Penny out, she told me that they had been beating Ralph and the other two guys. They had been put in a cell with 6 young thugs, including the guys who beat up Hanson. I called to try to get bond money for Ralph, Peter Titleman, and Bob Cover to get them out of there. The money was finally gotten together. I got in at noon to see Cover and Titleman to get their signatures. They really looked frightened and told me that they had to get out as soon as possible. When I was outside, the Negro runaround, he was a trustee at City Hall, told me that the guys in their cell planned to kill them tonight. I wanted to see Ralph to get his signature, but the desk sergeant told me the FBI, Federal Bureau, as he called them, had him and sent me to the 400 block of Pine Street. There was no one there. Then I went over to the Federal Building, and no one was there either. I came back to jail and asked Chief where Ralph was, and he told me that they had him in a cell in the back room the whole time. More irrelevancies. Ralph looked terrible. He had a big bruise on his forehead, and his lips were split and puffy. July 7th. Also today, one of the girls who had been kept out in Camilla told us the jailer had been bringing police dogs into the cells and intimidating the children with them. Camilla is where the juveniles are held. We have also heard that the cook or another kitchen person there is a sexual degenerate who is constantly touching the little girls who are sent out there. Unfortunately, there's very little that can be done as juvenile court judges are vested with tremendous power in the state of Georgia. As things stand now, we still have Thrower, Ricks, and Perdue in jail. The Lissavoy and Davis, who have come out on property bonds, have elected to stay in with them, as it is extremely dangerous for the white males to be in jail alone, as they are put in cells with local whites who take great delight in beating them. In line with this, the guys who beat up Ralph Allen and the other 2 guys are turned loose by the police, though they had quite a bit of time left on their sentences, and one of the Negro kids in jail saw the warden hand them some cash. On Monday, Reverend Wells and about 11 others walked down to City Hall to protest the jailing stemming from their attempt to use the pool Sunday. They were all arrested, and Reverend Wells was dragged into the jail from the alley by his genitals and is in very bad shape. The brutality of the local police is unbelievable, yet nothing is done other than a perfunctory investigation by the FBI with the filing of reports, and nothing more ever heard of the incident. Press coverage of what is happening here is miserable, and there's a great need for the people to know just what is happening here in Albany, as it is everyone's concern. They finally let the juveniles out in Camilla today. Last night, Mrs. Singleton, who has 2 kids in jail, called the judge at 2 a.m. to tell him she couldn't sleep, worrying about her babies. She also told him that she was praying for him, and this is her quote, every prayer I prayed has been answered. There's an interesting story concerning the power of prayer in the South, which CB told me. It seems the Negroes of Mississippi prayed for Senator Bilbo, and he died of throat cancer. Anyhow, this morning, the juveniles were turned loose after about 8 hours. In line with this prayer thing, Sheriff Screws, who beat Bobby Hall to death in Baker County back in the 40s, is now paralyzed. Sheriff Campbell, who hit CB with a cane, is hospitalized with a bad heart, and his wife died of cancer today. And the guys in Camilla who kicked Slater's wife and caused her miscarriage was struck by lightning the other day, and the people keep on praying. Pritchett is back up to this old trick. Today, Davis and DeLissavore were arrested again and held on suspicion, for which you can hold someone without charges for 72 hours in Georgia. Their crime was to walk down the main street with two Negro guys. Pritchard's image in the Northern press, the cop who copes with nonviolence by nonviolent methods, is a complete farce. Yet most of the people who come down for a few days to interview him are completely taken in. No one ever stops to consider that this so-called prevention of violence is achieved by prohibiting constitutional permissible conduct and enforced by illegal arrest. Democracy ceases to have any real meaning in this context, as police power has suppressed the Constitution here. Penny, I told you, I read a section where she had fasted and was getting out of jail. That was back in 1963. Well, Penny wrote something to the SNCC listserv after watching the picture Selma. And I just added a little that she said, and this was January 30th, 2015. She said, as for Laurie Pritchard, he may have sometimes had his officers cart people off on stretchers from the streets, but there was nothing nonviolent about what went on in his jail or in the surrounding counties where there were active movements organized by SNCC folks and local police. You know, you can talk to anyone out there and they think Albany's movement was a failure because Dr. King came here and left. No one knows the real story. And as I said earlier, the FBI, those reports were, they recorded, and I'd love to see some of them, but they didn't do anything about it. So it made Pritchard appear to be this person who was dealing with the nonviolent protesters by also being nonviolent and keeping the Albany movement from achieving much early on. I think it's something we still, the time is ripe, I think, for us to begin dealing with that locally. I think we should. The true story should come out, and it was just so interesting when Dennis sent his diary, because Dennis, part of his job was to go to check on everyone in jail in Albany and Camilla and Americus and other places. So that's basically what I wanted to say today.
I have a question. You mentioned failure, that the Albany movement was considered a failure. What in person's eyes made it be a failure as opposed to a success? What were they looking for?
The historians are saying Dr. King left here and we had not integrated this, we had not achieved any of the demands that were made by the Albany movement. Thank you, the Albany movement. So they labeled it a failure. But the movement was going on before Dr. King came to Albany, and it continued after he left.
One of the myths you touched on has to do with perception of Chief Pritchard as being nonviolent. That was even mentioned in a recent movie, Selma, and that one of the reasons that Albany happened as it happened was that he was nonviolent and he simply arrested people and locked them up. Would you talk a little bit about the violence that took place behind the scenes?
Well, as Dennis had said, and there's much more, I just pulled a few excerpts from his diary. But they were, just using, for example, with the white male students who were here working, they put thugs in, they would have thugs beating them up in the jail. And as one excerpt he had there said, the trustee said they intended to kill them. And they were paying them to the thugs to do this and letting them out early from whatever sentence they had.
I want to ask about President Kennedy. I just finished reading a chapter on the Albany movement and wrapped out after his autobiography, and it seems like Kennedy was vacillating and didn't really want to get involved until he was forced to. Is there something you can tell us about that?
Yeah, well, we had a conference. Dr. King was there, Y.T. Walker, don't remember Abernathy, and James Foreman of SNCC, Charles Jones. And they were trying to convince us to do voter registration alone. And that day was a bad day for me, I guess. And I got about as close to Bobby Kennedy as I am to this microphone. and told him he was supposed to be keeping the laws of our great union, and it was our right to protest. It's our right to march, First Amendment rights. And they were clearly trying to find the easy way to deal with us. And the easy way to deal with us was to send us to do voter registration. But they didn't do too well, do good a job on even voter registration, because we had, for example, in Tarrant County, we had Jack Chatfield. My memory is trying to leave me, but I was trying to remember Jack Chatfield, who was shot. And we had a whole house blown up where our headquarters for voter registration. And all they could do was investigate. No, nothing. Oh yeah, they had surveillance on us at all times. On me, I know. Another question?
Conversation, but what would you say to our black college students today?
I would say to all young people to watch out. Not be blinded by prejudice. Not be blinded by lies that are told in the news. We don't have the voice because the voice of the vote, because we aren't working hard enough to get the vote. And there's a need for young people to start learning about the politics of our country at an early age. Don't wait till they're 16, 17, 18. But learn at a young age, like 8, 9, and 10.
Reverend Sherrod, do you have any records from when you first came to Albany to set up the SNCC office? What happened to SNCC office records?
I always had all the participants to
Keep journals?
keep journals, yeah. Always had them. And I made reports as well. Kept a journal as well.
And do you
Some are
still?
Some of our records are at the Wisconsin University Historical Society. Some are here.
And some at your house, right?
Yeah.
There's quite a few at home.
I think these are so important, and Mrs. Sherrod, you expressed that so beautifully by reading part of Dennis Roberts' memoir, and I agree with you completely that these must be posted and published and protected. It's an incredible record when you have the daily account. And Reverend Sherrod, I think your journals from that period would be so insightful and so valuable. And I just thank you.
He has quite a few records and pictures. We have so many pictures, and been trying to figure out how do we deal with all of this. But he would write and actually started writing and then just stopped. So I don't think a book will come, but we have quite a few records, and he actually got his hands on some original letters and so forth. And see, Pritchett was made to be this giant of a person, so he got his hands on copies of letters from places as far away as Kansas and Nebraska, trying to get Pritchett to come to speak, to tell them how to hold their Negroes down. You know, that's why, I've been saying for quite some time, I think we here in Albany need to deal with this whole issue of Pritchett and the fact that he was violent, but he had everyone working to keep that away from the press. So you don't know about the violence here in Albany, but it was happening. Those who were experiencing it knew it was happening, and those who were working with others, and then to take them out to places like Camilla and Baker County. Baker County, I'm from Baker County, and we know what the reputation of the sheriffs from Baker County. So
Just reputation.
yeah.
That one was documented in federal court.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, yes. And see, I lived there, so I knew from firsthand the things that were happening there. But to take people from Albany out into those areas, the violence was happening here, but you knew it would happen out there. And you knew that the one thing that came to light was Marion and the loss of her child due to miscarriage after being injured out there in the jail. But you talk to the typical person, you think violence didn't happen here in Albany, like Bull Connor and the others, because it was, Gray had the press. He, I used to say he controlled what we read and what we saw, because he had the paper and he had the TV station, and I'm sure he had the connections. So Pritchett could do those things, and they knew, and the FBI would come in and nothing would happen. That's why Dennis was saying you needed to help get the word out about what was happening here in Albany. Violence was happening, and part of his job was to go out to the jails here and the jails out in those counties to check on the people who had been jailed.
Now, Mr. Searles was out the Georgia
Southwest Georgia.
Southwest Georgia.
And regrettably, the copies of that newspaper were destroyed in a fire. But can you recall how that paper covered the protests?
You want to speak to that?
Well, every weekend, Southwest Georgian would come out, and it was mostly a one-man operation. So it was not possible for Mr. Searles to be everywhere at one time, because we had activities sometime in 2 counties on the same day. But he did his best, Mr. Searles, in keeping up with us. And the other thing was he, being black, had to deal with fears as well.
Why would you name a city? I don't mean you, but why would the city name the city? Because Abernathy mentions Gray in his book, and he says that he was awful. Why would you name the civic center after someone who?
Well, we don't control that. In fact, we had majority white city commissions. It happens now. Why is it that you don't have a street in Albany with Dr. King's name on it that goes from the black community into the white community? You know, that's why I still have a problem attending the King Day activity, and that, you know, I had to speak to that at the task force meeting for EDC, because, you know, this man is saying, I don't understand who was that man that had the black paper telling people don't go? Well, I still don't go to the event, because when we were trying to get a street in Albany with Dr. King's name on it that would go from the black community into the white community, they fought it so hard. And then we got a black majority on the city commission at that time. My husband was serving, and they wouldn't pick another name, so they changed Jefferson Street to Martin Luther King Drive. And y'all may remember those signs went up, Jefferson Street became Martin Luther King. And then the next year there was an election. Joanne Pope ran for office, she won. Then you had a white majority on the on the city commission again, and they took the signs down and it became Jefferson Street again. So you still, you know, so you're gonna go and raise money. At the same time they were trying to do that, and when they changed the name, then I can't remember his name, but I think his last name was Chambliss. He was a state representative in Atlanta, was trying to get some legislation passed in Atlanta to stop what was happening here. And then they're gonna use his name to raise money, Dr. King. And I remember that first year, the money went to the Dixie League, and I don't know whether it was the Civil Rights Institute or something else, but that's, you know, so I still have a problem. Maybe it's better now, but I still have a problem with having the King Day activity and not being willing to honor him in any other way here in this city, you know. The same thing happened when C.B. King was still living. It was just before he died. Wanted to, you know, they later decided it would be the Veterans Park, but there was an effort to try to get the park down there by the Civic Center named the C.B. King Park. White people fought that so hard here in this city. You know, it's just, you know, you have to wonder about Albany. The other thing, the park down there, they tore the house down, and this is the summer of 1967. We were still working and distributing a newsletter, because again, Gray had the newspaper, he had the TV. We had to try to develop newsletters to get news out into the black community. And I'll never forget the Saturday morning. One Saturday morning, they all, you know, we had lots of white students here in Albany. In fact, in '66, we actually separated from SNCC because Stokely became the director of SNCC and said white people needed to go work in their own communities. And so white people were being told to leave SNCC. We had probably 25 white students here that summer, not just students, because I remember one was a professor from a college up in New Hampshire. So we didn't agree with that and separated from SNCC and incorporated the Southwest Georgia Project. That project is still working today. We have some major work going on here in this area. But they were out distributing the newsletter. We later got a print shop that we operated and all. But that Saturday morning, I was just at the beginning of a pregnancy with our daughter who's sitting over there now. And so I didn't feel well. And I didn't go out with them. And he was a young boy, he stuttered. Grady Christian, he's a grown man here in the city now. Grady stayed there with me. And I was in the bed and I was just lying across the bed, and I heard some people come in. It wasn't strange to hear the voices of white people because we had them around us, but they were asking Grady for Sherrod. And Grady was stuttering, trying to tell them, and they asked him to come go with them to look for him. Now, they were gone probably an hour. They came back, and they went in the back of the house where we had the office. And then they burst into the room where I was. I had a slip on, and I was screaming at them to get out. And one of them came more toward me and then stopped, and they left. Then Grady came back in the house. They had set the house on fire. Now, that was the house. They tore the house down to put the park in. No one asked us about the history of that area. No one asked us when they were even putting the park in. So if you would hear him talk, he'll tell you a lot of the timeline is not right, even in that park. But there were so many things. Now the fire trucks came, the police came, you never heard another thing. Now I can tell you a little something that happened that evening that'll make you chuckle. So we couldn't stay there anymore. And we had that's where a lot of the students were staying as well. So my husband and I got a few things we could get out of the house, and we got in the car to go down to my mother's in Baker County. And just outside of town, just before we get, I think that's 2nd Bethesda, the white church on the right, we had a flat tire. And this is something he's not good at. So he pulls to the side of the road, and we're just sitting there. It's dark. It was so dark. And he's got to think, So a truck pulled up and right behind us. And these are 2 white guys. And you could tell they had been drinking some. And I'm thinking, they didn't get us today. It's going to happen now. And they didn't recognize him. And they changed the tire. They changed the tire so we could get on the way. But there was always the threat of violence working out here in this city, and definitely out in the counties where we worked in the movement. But I think it's on us here in this city. We need to deal with the fact that we are looked upon as a failure. Our movement did not fail. And where other movements started, and you can put some years to it, 2 or 3 years, and nothing else really happened much beyond that, this work has gone on unstopped all of these years. He will still get calls from people who have problems, and has always had to be available to help. He almost went to jail here. They tried to jail. I do have to say something, and this was in the 80s when he was a city commissioner. I'll never forget this. James Gray died, I think it was 86, and we had 7 black elected officials at that time. They got together and decided that if there was ever a time to try to gain some power here, political power here in the city, it was now. Now that Gray had passed. So they organized, you all may remember, Unity Community. It was so powerful. It was the first time black people in this city voted together. Now, the decision was made, well, we can't get a person in as mayor, but we can make a decision about who the mayor will be. And they had picked Keenan, I think, the white people. Black people decided to back Larry Bays. Remember that? Larry Bays was elected, and so was Henry Mathis that year. Well, I didn't usually go with them to they have something called the National League of Cities, and the meeting was being held in Washington, D.C. My husband had been going to these meetings, so I decided to go with him this time. And he had a coupon to upgrade to a suite at the hotel where they were staying. There was an illegal meeting because the only person running the city who wasn't there was Bill Miller, because Bill Miller didn't travel. But you had the mayor, they met in the suite. See, I went in the bedroom. I couldn't see him, but I could hear the whole meeting. And what Bays was trying to do, he was trying to get them to go, just let him have a blank check to do the things he wanted to do. But my husband and Arthur Williams said, no, we represent people too. Well, Bays was angry. He had gotten Henry Mathis to go along with everything he wanted. Mathis couldn't get in before that. But all of a sudden he's in, and he and Bays are about as tight as you can get. So I couldn't see Bays. He argued with them. I couldn't see him, but I heard him say, I'll let the people deal with you. Now, he said Bays was in the door, pointing, saying that. Henry stayed there to continue the argument, and then they finally left. I mean, everybody, the city manager, everybody was in that room. We came back to Albany, and we started hearing that they were investigating the travel of city commissioners. And then they supposedly, it was so unbelievable that summer when they indicted him, Arthur Williams, and James, I forgot the white commissioner. He wasn't even on the commission anymore, but they indicted him. And then what was so unbelievable, I mean, this stuff went to trial. They indicted him for supposedly double billing the city for $90. And they had Arthur Williams, I think it was like $3,500. What they didn't count on, though, was Joanne Pope not joining in with them. She was willing to tell the truth. She was invited to a meeting with Bays, and she named the district attorney and the others who were there to try to get her to go along with the lie. She wasn't willing to do it. But she did make herself available to testify in his trial, about the conspiracy they put together to try to get them off the commission and actually send them to jail. They acquitted Arthur, not acquitted, they had a hung jury in that November, but they decided then that they would have both of these trials in the next term of court in February. I will never forget, because CB came to court. He died, I think, the next month. He was real frail. And he came to court for Sherrod's trial because he said, Charlie, I don't know whether they'll want to get you for the work that you've done here in this area. The district attorney, the assistant DA, was from Baker County. We called him Brother Jones. He had been calling my mother's house throughout this time, telling her to tell Sherrod, don't worry about a thing because he hasn't done anything. Larry Bays would call our house trying to get him to let him pay the $90 so they'd just have Arthur. Arthur doesn't know to this day how he stood up for him. He wasn't going to let Arthur be out there by himself. He had not double billed the city for $90. It was a lie, and Joanne Pope was going to testify to that. But she didn't have to. When they called the city treasurer to the stand, he was the first witness, he had to admit that the city owed him money rather than vice versa from that trip. So the case was really won, but it wasn't over. So they had a break, and CB had Carl Bryant there and his son Shavine. So he told my husband, he said, what we want to do is sandwich the DA between Carl and Shavine. So if we don't call a witness, we can do that. But that would mean not calling Joanne Pope to the stand so she could tell the story. But you didn't need her to come and tell the story. I'm telling you this because it's kind of funny. He knows, CB, I want the white woman to testify. And so CB worked on him. He said, Shirley, I hope I live to attend another mass meeting so I can tell the folk that Charlie believed in the white woman more than he believed in himself. In the end, we finally convinced him that Joanne Pope wasn't needed. But the assistant DA got up there and said, this man shouldn't be here. Now, he's supposed to be convincing the jury to convict him. But he got up there and said, this man shouldn't be here. Larry Bays should be here. You know, so he didn't try at all to convince them to convict him. The jury went out for about 15 minutes. They said Coke was on the table and they felt they needed to drink some, and they came back out and, you know. But they took them through
Coca-Cola, there is.
They took them through months of every week on the TV with the media saying they were indicted. They really set in to destroy them. You know, that's what they did. And, you know, I could go on and on about some of the stuff we've had to endure as a result of the activism through the years. Incident after incident of things that the police did or that others did here in the city. You have no idea the sacrifices. I know last week when he was at Rock Hill, South Carolina, people were saying to me, we had no idea. Well, he was at Rock Hill. He was sentenced to 30 days at hard labor on the chain gang. You know, he always referred to it as a chain gang. Well, I actually heard the judge last week say chain gang. So it really was the chain gang, and it was there that he...
When I tell you a lie? When have I ever lied to you?
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, violence was definitely and something that had to be dealt with, you know, but you had to lose the fear, or, you know, I've talked to people today, I would have left. You know, I took one lady, she's hearing this stuff, I wouldn't have done that. Well, if you hadn't, if people like him had not done the things that they did back then, had not, the beatings, he could go on and on about the beatings. Even the night when Jack Chatfield was, and his sister is sitting over there, was, hold your hand up. Yeah, when he was shot, you know, they always talked about how they were on the floor and the bullets, he could just hear the bullets going by. They shot up the house over in Dawson that they were in. It was later bombed, you know. You always talked about the FBI, the things they'd say to you, especially the one who told you about the Flint being wide or whatever.
That was a deputy sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing in front of the sheriff in the jailhouse in Tarrant County. And Z.T. Matthews, the sheriff, was standing in front of me. And I witnessed a heavy hand coming from my left side to my right side, which knocked me down to the floor when I was answering a question that the sheriff asked. I made the mistake of saying yes instead of yes, sir. I did that twice. And I thought he was responding. I came up responding, but we're still human beings and children of the Lord. And about that time, a man who was also in the building was sawing off, whittling with a stick. I saw that man again in his business in Sassa. And he said, the Flint River is mighty deep, and they're building pine boxes every day. That was about 50 years ago. I still remember it.
There was something that happened in Baker County in later years. I read something, maybe Lee was in your book, where you quoted, Sears was quoted saying Albany was almost hell, close to hell, and hell was Baker County. So in 1976, my mother decided to run for office in Baker County. And at that time, the sheriff, decided he would retire, but he decided one of his sons would become the new sheriff. So they called him Scroot. He was running for sheriff at the same time my mother was running for the Board of Education. So on the night of the election, we were there in the courthouse in Newton watching them count the ballots. And there was some room between where we were all standing, and they were at a table like this counting. Well, the sheriff walked from a back room, walked by everyone, and he's just speaking. But he walked a few feet away and realized he had just spoken to Charles Sherrod.
He shook my hand.
He came back, and he said, "I take that back. I didn't know who you were." And then he's standing there, he had a gun on his side, and we had our two young children there, and both of them are staring at each other. I mean, it was so, and if you knew anything about the Gator, he didn't care. He was just mean enough to pull that gun out and shoot him right there. Now, he was angry about many things. The latest thing was that Sherrod had been having meetings telling people, don't put another Johnson in office. Let it end now. So he was very angry about that. Someone apparently ran out to where his son was and told his son what was happening. And the son came back in the courthouse and grabbed his daddy's arm and said, "Come on, Daddy, just leave that alone." Now, he had to pull him out of there. But that's the only thing that stopped that scene that night. And then after they finished the counting, we had to drive from Newton to Albany. I can tell you that was a very, very scary drive. But probably the only thing that saved us then was that the sheriff's son was elected, and they were celebrating. Yeah.